Sarah Lydia, wow, you are the first. And you live the furthest away. Hi, Tamar. Where am I? That's the secret question. I'm in, actually, Bal Harbor, right on the ocean. I'm visiting my son, Yosef, and his family. And I want to talk about my first excursion into a new reality in over a year. Hi, Phyllis. Hi, Rifki. That's so nice. Hi, Jill. So I'm in Florida. I actually went to the airport, got on an airplane, braved everything, and Phyllis, what's your father's name? There's a few yurt sites tonight. We'll dedicate the class to everyone. I am enjoying Bal Harbor. Bracha, that's so nice. I think I'm going to be at your house on Friday to hear the Megillah. Bashuleya and the Chassin Kala Mazel Tov. And my grandson Naftali is joining us, who brought me his beautiful baby, my great-grandson Matul, who I saw last night for the first time ever. Thank you, everybody, for welcoming me to Florida. It's actually quite exciting. I really didn't know what it was going to be. And two gorgeous grandchildren just beaming at me the whole time. So that made the whole thing worth it. Jill, I'm coming to you next, now that I've broken free of being locked up in Los Angeles, although I was never really locked up. Phyllis, what's your father's full name? Do you have his Hebrew name? Because we're going to dedicate the class today to a few people. I'm just going to wait another minute or two. And then we're going to talk about Purim. Miranda, how are you? We're such an international group tonight. We have New York, we have Jerusalem, we have Los Angeles. And, okay, so we're going to start. We're going to start class. I like to reward those who come on time. So I want to dedicate first this class tonight to Deborah Fletcher's beloved father. His name was Yehuda ben Chaim Dov HaKohen. Tonight actually is his 20th yurt site, and his soul on the merit of the good resolutions, hopefully, that we take tonight, and that we learn that his soul begs the Mashiach to come down into the world. And it's Phyllis's father's yurt site also tonight, Yosef ben Zev. And Yosef ben Zev and Yehuda ben Chaim Dov HaKohen, and also Tzipora bas Yitzhak HaKohen, who's actually Shiva is this week, should really all just bring down Queen Esther, bring down Mordecai, so that we really can celebrate Purim with true joy, because it says that one of the only holidays that is going to be when Mashiach comes is Purim. We're never going to give up Purim, ever, ever, ever. So all of you, your beloved Sherry, your grandmother, Brina Frima ben Bas Avraham, her yurt site also, all these beloved people in our lives. You know, we're so lucky that we never lose attachment, and we don't lose our connection to the people we love. And all these neshamas should just, you know, come with us and celebrate Purim. We should all dance together with joy and happiness in Purim. So tonight we're going to learn about Purim, and at the very end of the class, in order to keep you here all night, I have one of the best, my only Purim story. So, only simchas, only joy. But I have a wonderful Purim story. Maybe I'll tell it in the middle, or maybe I'll tell it at the end. But let's start learning, because I intend to cover a lot of ground. Now, it is 11 o'clock at night in Florida, but I'm on 8 o'clock at night time I'm actually on nobody's time. So I was up at 3:30 this morning because I went to sleep yesterday to try to get used to the time zone. So, okay, let's start. So tonight's teachings are going to be mostly from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I actually have pages of notes I took on many different classes, but there is so much on the Megillah and so much on Purim. So the way we're going to run the class tonight is I'm going to do a few teachings from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and then I'm going to go into the text in depth with different commentaries to get some more insight into the actual Megillah, because I find for myself that once the holiday starts, you wish that you had read the Megillah before and that you knew some of the commentaries and some of the inner insights. And I feel that way every year. So thank God this year on the airplane, I had many hours that I could prepare the Megillah, and I finished it today, and it's just it's so beautiful, and we're going to share it tonight. So I want to talk about the fast first. So tomorrow is what we call the Fast of Esther. It's a daytime fast. It starts before sunrise. If you were in Florida, I found out the fast starts at 5:36, I believe. If you want to eat before the fast, you can. And fast the whole day. If you're not able to fast, then give extra charity, extra tzedakah money. And everybody will do the best they can. At the end of the fast is the first Megillah reading. The Megillah reading is at night. We're obligated to hear the Megillah reading twice, once at night and once in the daytime. And so the first one is tomorrow night. Everybody really should, if you are going to a Megillah reading, dress up in costume. The High Center is going to be having a Megillah Zoom. It's going to be a fun evening. It doesn't fulfill, for anybody who's concerned about fulfilling the actual mitzvah of hearing the Megillah, it needs to be heard live. But we are going to do a Zoom event where we are going to read the Megillah, and different people are going to read different chapters. We're going to do some fun things. Everybody needs to come in costume. You will see me in my Queen Esther outfit. So tomorrow night, that will be a Chai Center event. It should be in the Chai Center newsletter, or you can go on the website, chaicenter.org, or send me an email, and that will be at 8 o'clock California time. So that's what, 8 o'clock, Phyllis, 8 o'clock California time. You should have gotten an email about it from the Chai Center. Okay, so let's start with a little bit about the fast. So it says that all the Jewish people follow the custom of fasting on the 13th of the month of Adar, and we're commemorating the fast that Esther and the Jews took during the time of Haman to avert the evil decree of Haman. And it says to establish for themselves fast and the crying out from the fast. Esther asked Mordechai to have the people observe on her behalf this fast before she would approach the King Ahasuerus, to plead for the Jewish people to be saved. And it says, and the Jews, in the text it says, and the Jews congregated on the 13th for the purpose of fasting together. Why do we fast? We fast to arouse divine mercy before our enemies. That's why we're fasting in this particular time. We fast on Yom Kippur for a different purpose. But this holiday and many holidays, we fast for mercy in the face of our enemies. The Fast of Esther highlights the importance of asking God's blessings. We ask God's blessings not only when it's a time of trouble, but also in good times, that we should have the blessing of God. Correct, Amalei? And And it says we can arouse unlimited divine blessings and transform the circumstances which we find ourselves in. When I was preparing the Megillah and the commentaries, I was so taken by the comparison to what we are going through now. It was like, it just grabbed my attention, and I hope you'll hear it in the learning that we're going to do tonight. Just so many of the similarities and so many of the struggles that the Jews went through at that time that we are still going through today. The name of the fast of Esther highlights the role of the women, yay, the women, in the redemption. We know it says that in the merit of the righteous women, the Jews were redeemed from Egypt. And also we know that as in the days of your exodus from Egypt, I will show you wonders. So since the Arizal teaches that the future redemption will follow the pattern of the Exodus, we will assume that it will come in the merit of the righteous women. So women, let's be righteous, okay, and help to bring the redemption. So we're going to start with a few things. One of the things we learned from the Baal Shem Tov is he said, and there is a law that says you may not read the Megillah backwards. So what does it mean reading it backwards? According to the Baal Shem Tov, it means don't read it as if it was history that happened and we're just going along and we're reading some nice history. No, we have to read it as we are going through it today. There are lessons in it for us today, and it is our story today. It's not just the story from the past. Also, the holiday of Purim, like every Jewish holiday, is called an Eitz Ratzon, which means an auspicious moment. What happens in an auspicious moment? The gates of heaven are wide open. It says on Purim, there's a light that comes down to the world that only comes down on Purim, that light that was hidden away when the world was created. And it's so powerful and so transcendent that the only time it comes into the world is on the holiday of Purim. So there's going to be light coming down, and we want to take advantage of the light. It's also a very unusual circumstance. It doesn't happen very often that Purim is on a Friday going into Shabbos. So that is also another unusual circumstance. Also, I just want to go over, before we begin the learning, a few commandments, the few mitzvahs of Purim. So one is to hear the Megillah twice at night and in the daytime, as best as you can. If you are not going out, if you are being protected in that way, stay protected and read the Megillah. Come to our event, our High Center event tomorrow night, and be happy. That's the mitzvah everybody can do. Be happy. It's an unbounded time of joy and happiness. We're supposed to have what we call a feast of Esther, and that feast will take place on Friday day. We should have it early enough in the day so we don't interfere with our preparations for Shabbos, because we have to. If you're drinking till you don't know the difference between blessed is Haman and cursed is Mordechai, you need to light Shabbos candles. So Myrna. So don't forget to light your Shabbos candles tomorrow night. Don't get so happy in the mitzvah that you forget to light your Shabbos candles and go right into Shabbos. Okay, so you have to have a feast. You have to hear the Megillah. You have to give Mashalach Monat, which is 2 different food blessings to one other person. For instance, you can give a pickle and a salami. I don't eat salami, so don't give that to me. You can give a banana and a jar of peanut butter. You can give crackers and an avocado. Or you can give an elaborate food gift. It is better instead of giving elaborate baskets of sugared food to people, to give that money to tzedakah. And we are obligated to give to 2 poor people. We're obligated to give the equivalent of at least a meal, and hopefully more, to at least 2 poor people. So there are 4 major mitzvahs that we are commanded to do on Purim, and the most ultimate one is really to be filled with joy and happiness. Okay, so let's start with a few teachings of the Rebbe, and then we're going to go into the text itself. Okay. The Megillah begins, and it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. I am making a big assumption that almost everybody who is watching knows the story of Purim. Okay? And if anybody does not, you can let me know. But I'm just assuming that everybody knows the basic story. There was Queen Esther, there's King Ahasuerus, there's Mordechai, and there's Haman. Those are the main characters in the story. So we have a tradition that wherever in the Torah, the opening words, or the words in a sentence say Vayahi, and it came to pass, it's an indication, Sarah, it's an indication that it's a time of trouble. Okay, so it says that Haman had not yet risen to power like he would be in the future. So why should the beginning of the reign of King Ahasuerus be considered a time of trouble for the Jews? And also we have to remember that at that time, Jews were affluent. They were influential. They had prestigious positions. Mordechai was the head of the community. He sat at the king's gates. That was not a small thing. And he was one of the most respected people in the nation. He consulted on major issues with the king himself, and they enjoyed freedom to study Torah and perform mitzvahs. So why does the Talmud say that this time was a time of trouble? It says, for a Jew, exile is always a time of difficulty. And even for those of you, Sarah, thank you so much for missing me. I love when people miss me. Come visit. But I'm in Florida, so you're going to have to wait till I come home. Okay, the Shabbos I come home, you're invited. And anybody else wants to. I've been having outdoor Shabbases, and my guests have been brave enough to sit in the cold, so that's always an option. So it was a time of trouble because we were in exile. We're not in our own homeland. We're not in our own place. And unfortunately, we see day after day very difficult anti-Semitic things that are occurring here in this country and in many other countries. I mean, almost every day now in the news, there's an item about something that is blatantly anti-Semitic, like not even hidden anymore. So a time of exile is a time of trouble. And until Mashiach comes, and we're banished from our native land. Our native land is Eretz Yisrael. And what is one of the most destructive aspects of exile is that we don't even know we're in exile. I never knew we were in exile. You know, I grew up in America, and I grew up with a wonderful family, and I grew up, going to Jewish summer camps and Jewish teen tours and eating gefilte fish, and I didn't know that we were in exile. In fact, when I first went to Israel in 1968, and everybody kept saying to me, why don't you come home? And I'm just going, home, this is, I was like, this is not my home, this is not my home, and I had no idea that it was my home. And so we have to understand that we are in exile. And I don't think today, maybe a few years ago, people had idyllic lives and people could say everything was going well. And today it's hard to say everything is going well for everybody on many different levels. But it says the most dangerous part of exile is our acceptance of it. And we feel comfortable and we don't want to make a change. So we know as Jews that living a life of material prosperity is not our ultimate goal. We want to be connected to God, and we want to feel that we need to fulfill that aspect of being connected to God. So I just want to greet my son, Yosef. Yosef, would you like to say hello to my Facebook class?
Of course I will.
I'm here with Yosef. He's going to say hello to everybody.
Happy Purim.
Okay, now you've seen Yosef. Okay. So the previous Lubavitch Rebbe said, we did not go into exile willingly. We were sent there by the hand of God. And hi, Dova. And God had a purpose. Everything that God does has a purpose. We weren't just sent here randomly. We each have a mission. We're in the place we're in to have a mission in the world. And to refine and elevate the countries that we find ourselves in. And some of us here on this class tonight are in different countries, some are in different states. There's a purpose for us being in the place that we're being. It is not random, and we have to participate in what is going on around us. Although now we've been told to isolate. It's hard to know, do we participate, do we isolate? But there are many ways to participate. So when you enter a city, we're told to follow its customs. We're obligated to follow the laws of the land according to Torah. And we have to work within the society and make sure the values of Torah are lived up to. So Mordechai was a member of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the Jewish court. And he was willing to give up many hours of study and teaching in Torah in order to serve in the court of Ahasuerus. And he realized that the Persian Empire was the instrument that God chose for him to bring about the return of the Jews to who they are as Jews, to the land and to the land of Israel, and to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, the holy temple that we learned about all in last week's class. And he spent his time and energy in the service of the Persian king. He did not go off to yeshiva. He did not sit on top of a mountain by himself, but he dedicated himself to seeing what he could do, not only to help Jews. When you're working in an empire like the Persian Empire, you're making life better for everybody. So he was involved in Persian life and removed from it. He served at court, but he rejected its values. He accepted the fact of living in exile, but only on a material level. For spiritual matters, he knew that our souls did not go into exile. And even in exile, we are connected to God. That's one thing that was said over and over again in very profound ways by the Russian Jews when they were sitting in jail and they were being kept from practicing Judaism, is that they dedicated themselves on a soul level to keeping an attachment to Judaism. So it says that Mordechai did not only rely on political power to try to annul the decree. Here's what he did. He put on sackcloth and ashes, and he called on the Jewish people to turn to God in tshuva. Tshuva means that one's soul returns to who it really is, as you were created, as we're supposed to be. And he also gathered 22,000 Jewish children and taught them Torah. And this is what he did to annul the decree. First, on a spiritual level, and only there did after he asked Esther to approach the king. And we're going to go into some of the details in the text in detail. So Esther also had the same priority. She asked Mordechai when the decree came out to kill all the Jews, gather all the Jews and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, and I and my maidens will also fast. And she asked Mordechai to do the same. And you would think she was endangering her life because she hadn't been called to appear before Ahasuerus for a month. It says that no one was allowed to appear in front of the king unless called for. And if the king did not put out his golden scepter to receive them, then they would be put to death. And she risked death. And she was hoping that her beauty that was so appealing and so attractive to the king would make him look at her in favor. But we know that after fasting, people don't look their best. And now we're talking about a 3-day fast. And it surely would lower the possibility of her being successful. And she realized that before approaching Ahasuerus, it would be necessary to remove the reason for the decree through tshuva. So we know that one of the reasons for the decree was that the Jews went against what they were required to do, which was not attend the party of King Ahasuerus, which we're going to read about, and that it was not only that they attended the feast that he made for them, but they were enjoying the feast. And at the feast, it started off by being with kosher food and kosher wine, and then it went to non-kosher food and non-kosher wine. And for that, this decree was declared against them because they left the basic tenets of Judaism, and they were turning in the direction of assimilation and being part of the Persian society, and now they had to do tshuva for it. And that's what Esther was hoping to arouse them through the fasting, that they could do this tshuva and then annul that degree in that level. So that the Purim story reveals this commitment to Jewish identity and the awareness of God as a master. And there was a miracle that was made, and I think we're just going to go into the text, and we'll do some of the Rebbe's teaching after, because I want to talk about the beginning of the story. And this is what I teach usually every year in my live classes, and I teach from the Torah anthology of the Moam Loez, the collection of the Moam Loez. And I had to go through the whole book yesterday and today because my copy that I had all my notes in and underlined, I looked through my 1,000 books or more at my house before I left, and I couldn't find it. I must have left it maybe at a class I was teaching last year or somewhere, so I had to reread it and take more notes, and it was great. I love it. It's beautiful. So here we go. It opens up and it says, it was in the days of Ahasuerus. He was Ahasuerus who ruled from India to Ethiopia, 127 lands. So there are many, many things. Just in this one sentence, we could spend the whole night. So the purpose is to publicize the miracle, and we have to describe the kingdom of Ahasuerus so we know how powerful he was, and what kind of decree was issued against the Jews, and what kind of miracle came to annul that decree. So he was the king, and the story is like very exciting. So I don't know how many people really read the background and read the commentary, so I want to give you a taste of what it is. So it says, Ahasuerus was one of the kings, and he came into power through his father Cyrus, or Koresh as he was called also, when the Jews were at their lowest. So it says 70 years had passed since the Babylonian exile had happened, and that they were not redeemed. And they were supposed to have, the prediction was that after 70 years, the Beis Hamikdash would be rebuilt, and it wasn't rebuilt. And this pleased Ahasuerus very much, and he made this feast, and he showed all his wealth, and he wanted the Jews to sin. That was his intention. Now, he calculated wrong, so he miscalculated the date that the temple was supposed to be rebuilt, but he wasn't relying only that God had forsaken them. He wanted to make sure that God would forsake them by making the party and making different things to bring the Jewish nation to sins, basically. So the book again starts with Vayehi, and it was, and it means woe and grief will follow, and it certainly did. So it says also that the Babylonian exile was the worst of all the exiles, and there was tremendous grief. So here is Ahasuerus' background. It says that there was a Persian king, and his name was, if there's anybody who knows the history, I'm going to be pronouncing it wrong, Astyages. And he had no sons, he only had a daughter. And this daughter was seduced, and she became pregnant, and she had a child. And this child, the king had the courier killed, and he had the child, the boy child, put on top of a mountain that he should die and be abandoned. But it says that a large dog came, and a large dog suckled him so that he was able to stay alive. And he grew up in the mountains, and he got a group of men. And they gave him the name Koresh, or Cyrus, which means dog in Persian. And when Astyages found out that his grandson was alive, he sent people to kill him. And they actually killed him. They were able to kill all the band that came to fight them, and they went to the capital, and and Cyrus killed his grandfather, and he took the king, he sat on the throne, he took the kingdom of Persia for himself. Now, at the time, there was a man named Darius, and he was also a king of a nation, and he wanted to have an alliance with Cyrus by marrying his daughter, and Cyrus agreed. And from that union, Ahasuerus was born. There are many opinions of how he was born. That's one opinion. There's also an opinion that he was born as a commoner. But it says he inherited the throne eventually. And it says his name, Ahasuerus, was only given to this king. His true name was another name I cannot pronounce, like Artaxerxes, something like that. And it said his title was from Hashrosh, meaning a headache. He gave the people a headache. His will changed from day to day, and it was very hard to know what he wanted and how he wanted to live. And they basically called him a headache. That's what he was called. And it says that he was a brother in cruelty to Nebuchadnezzar, and we know how cruel Nebuchadnezzar was. So here we have the picture of this very wicked man. And it says he ruled from India to Ethiopia. He used to have, I think, 256 countries under his rule, and he only now had 127 countries left. And we also know that when it says 127 countries, it says he ruled these countries equally, as if the one that was furthest was the one he was in, that there was that amount of fear and power that he had. I think this is all very important to understand, this setting of how the miracle happened in a nation that was so powerful. So now we have Vashti comes into the picture. Everybody knows about Vashti. Belshazzar had a young daughter named Vashti. He was killed. Vashti married Ahasuerus, and they took over the vessels of the Holy Temple. Ahasuerus had these vessels from Belshazzar, and he had been killed for the destruction of the temple and making use of the vessels of the temple. And Cyrus actually ordered the temple to be rebuilt and all its vessels to be restored to the Jews, but after 2.5 years, he died, and then Ahasuerus took the throne. And Ahasuerus immediately halted the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, and he took all the vessels and he used them for himself. And all this is detailed. Now, Haman comes from Amalek. Amalek is the nation that we are supposed to totally wipe out. And I actually want to just read a little something from the Rebbe on Amalek, just to clarify for whoever might not understand the power of Amalek and how it affects us in our everyday life. So Haman's ancestor was Agag, who was the king of Amalek, and Mordecai and Esther, we know, were from the family of Shaul, who was the first king of Israel. And Amalek was the first nation to attack them. And we are obligated to blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heaven. So after Shaul was crowned king, the prophet Shmuel ordered him to fulfill God's commandment, meaning that he should smite the Amalekites and destroy all that was theirs. Have no pity on them at all. Slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and donkey, and all their fruit trees. So Shul, usually in a war, that was not the case. Not everybody would be commanded to be killed. Shul gathered the Jewish people together. They waged war. They defeated the Amalekites, and they destroyed the nation. They destroyed the property. However, he had pity on the king Agag and on the choices of the sheep and cattle, and he brought them back with him, and he was reproached by the prophet Samuel for doing this. And this was a very serious mistake because the king was alive one night and he was able to father a child in between his capture and his being put to death. That one night that he stayed alive, that King Shul had pity on him and kept him alive, and that child was the ancestor of Haman. Haman is a descendant of Amalek, direct descendant of Amalek, the nation of pure evil. We say Hitler was a descendant of Amalek also. That level of pure evil comes from there. And it says, given the obligation not to read the Megillah backwards, we know that it is not, the whole of Tanakh, the whole of the Bible is not a history book. It's something active, something that we have to live with the times. We have to be involved in our service. And it says, even though the name Amalek refers to a nation, it describes a character trait within us. You know, I was very lucky when I lived in Jerusalem in the 1970s. The head of the Breslov movement, his name was Rev Gedalia Konek, and he taught a very small group of women, He was a Rebbe, and I really had the privilege to learn with him, even though I didn't speak one word of Hebrew and actually had no idea of what he was saying, but somebody would always translate for me, and just to be in the presence at that time of such a holy person. And I went with friends to visit him on Purim, and he gave over this teaching, and that was the first time I ever heard this particular teaching that I'm going to say now. So it says that Amalek refers to a nation, but it is a character trait that's within all of us. And it says that just like Amalek stood in defiance and opposition to the Jewish people, the trait symbolized by Amalek defies the foundation of our divine service. Remember what Amalek did to you as you came forth from Egypt, how he encountered you on the way and cut down all the weak who straggled behind you. And the Midrash explains that the Hebrew word for he encountered you can also be taught as he cooled you off. Amalek represents that cold rationality which makes us question everything we do or experience. So for a complete relationship with God, we have to transcend our intellectual limitations. When we receive the Torah, the Jewish nation said, we will do and we will listen. We will do refers to carrying out God's will. And we will listen means we want to understand intellectually the commandments. But we're going to do them first. And Amalek tells us, by all means, accept the Torah, but look it over carefully. How much do you really want to do? I mean, you don't really have to do the whole thing. Maybe you should do a little bit. Why should you exert yourself, etc., etc.? And this is the main teaching I heard from Reb Gedalia Koenig, and this is what the Rebbe is teaching us today. he says that there is a numerical equivalence between the word Amalek and the word Suffolk. The word Suffolk is the Hebrew word for doubt. Amalek causes doubt and hesitation, which cools off the passion in our divine service. That when we want to win this inner war that we have within ourselves with Amalek, this inner war of doubt and not moving forward, that we have to devote ourselves to God without holding back. We have to have this enthusiasm and not be confined by our reason. We don't want our reason to interfere and stop us. That is Amalek. And it says that Shaul did not intend to transgress the will of God. He was a righteous person, after all. He was the king. He was chosen by God. And it says that he was like a newborn child that didn't even sin. So what was his mistake? It says his mistake in his dealings with Amalek was in following the dictates of his reason. He saved the herds of cattle to sacrifice them to God, under the mistaken impression that the service would be better. It would be better to do that. It would be better to sacrifice them. God would like it more. It would more completely fulfill their mission. Well, that's not what the commandment was. And he wanted to demonstrate that everything of the world could be used by God. But that was not what he was commanded to do. He was commanded to wipe out Amalek. So his rationale, his reasoning was contrary to the explicit command of God. And to obey God, Shmuel told him, is better than a sacrifice. Like, do what God is asking, not what you want. You know, it reminds me of reading, I think it was Harville Hendricks' book, Getting the Love You Want. And he said, talking to a married couple in therapy, your comfort food when you were little growing up and sick was strawberry ice cream. And your husband's comfort food was, chicken soup. And when he gets sick, you're bringing him strawberry ice cream. But really what he needs for comfort and illness is chicken soup. So, it's like what the person wants, what God wants is what we are supposed to fulfill, not what we thought would be a better plan. So to obey God is better than a sacrifice. And we can't grasp God by our intellect, by our limited, our finite mind. And when we approach God with reason, we're reasoning it out, we're figuring it out. Sometimes there's error, because the limitations of our understanding prevent us from reaching this infinite dimension of godliness. And the only way to connect with these levels of godliness is to do the will of God in the way that God is asking. And what does that mean? And we've learned this many times in class, the concept of Kabbalah's Ol, wearing the yoke of heaven, accepting the sovereignty of God with commitment. Kabbalah's Ol takes us beyond ourselves. Kabbalah's Ol, I always describe as like if you have an oxen yoked to a wagon and they put blinders on him like this, so that he can't see to the right and he can't see to the left. He only goes forward in the direction that he is supposed to go. That's Kabbalah's Ol. And it brings out an infinite potential in our soul. And in this Purim story, this is what brought about the defeat of Haman, who is the descendant of Amalek. Why? Because it calls Mordechai. It says Mordechai in the Megillah. It says Mordechai HaYehudi, meaning the Jew, a descendant. It says the word means a descendant of the tribe of Yehuda, which was King David's tribe. But Mordechai was actually from the tribe of Benjamin, and he was a relative of Shaul. But in the Megillah, the entire Jewish people are called Yehudim, without distinction of their tribal origin. Because we all have this oneness. It doesn't matter, you're from this tribe, I'm from this tribe, you're from this tribe. But we all serve God with this aspect of Kabbalah's Ol. And Mordechai and Esther show this connection to God, this commitment to the will of God, and they encouraged their fellow Jews to turn to God with tshuva and to strengthen their Torah observance even under the threat of the decree of Haman. And it says that we have all these voices around us telling us, have a good life, be happy, live it up, etc., etc. That's a Moloch that brings in doubt and hesitation into our lives. And if we follow a path of Kabbalah Soul, we can overcome that. And in Purim, it says that Kabbalah Soul brought light and joy, gladness and honor to the Jewish people. So light means Torah, joy is festivals, gladness is the commandment of circumcision, and honor is the commandment of tefillin. These things were forbidden by Haman, and they were brought back at the time of the celebration of his downfall. So Amalek appears in this story full on in the form of Haman, and Vashti also followed in a similar line. She wasn't really a friend of the Jews, and that she said the temple was destroyed by my father Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, and they couldn't rest until it was in ruins. Don't allow the Jews to rebuild it. She did terrible, terrible things to the Jews. And she and Ahasuerus were punished for this. So also when it says that Ahasuerus ruled over 127 states, what do we know? Where did we find the number 127 before in our Tanakh, in our Torah? We found it with the life of Sarah. It says that Sarah lived 127 years and that she brought many people to believe in God. And she would give birth to someone named Darius II, and in the second year of his reign, he gave the orders to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. And it's interesting because one of the reasons that Ahasuerus had so much hatred against the Jews is there was a prediction that a Jew would sit on his throne and wear his crown. And he thought it would be a rebellion by the Jews, but he'd never realized that it would be his own son from Esther who would be the one to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. So the Megillah starts off by saying it was in the days of Ahasuerus, not King Ahasuerus. So there's a debate. Was he of royal blood or wasn't he of royal blood? And he grasped the reins of power, and he had power and wealth. And again, we're going to go into the beginning of the Megillah, and everybody should try to read it at home, and you can get it on anything. Ask Rabbi Google, you'll be able to find it, or go to Chabad.org for a copy of it, and you'll be able to read it. And it says that Ahasuerus actually hated the Jews more than Haman did, but being the king, he couldn't really outwardly display that. It wasn't really right. But he married Vashti, and one of the things it says about marrying Vashti is that she was from a royal line, and it's brought up in one of the commentaries that she, one of the reasons that she did not go into Ahasuerus when he called for her, and that she was very belligerent to him, and that she belittled him because she felt that she was the queen and she really should have ruled. But at that time, women weren't the rulers, and so Ahasuerus ruled, and she was very resentful about that fact. It also, we know in the Megillah that God's name does not appear in the Megillah. There are many, many reasons for it. One reason is, and how do we refer to God? So where it says in the Megillah, when you will read the Megillah, and it says King Ahasuerus, that refers to Ahasuerus. But when it just says the king, that is a reference to God. And it said one of the reasons that they didn't, when they wrote up the book of Esther, they didn't write God in it, is because then when it would be translated into all different languages and different empires, they would put in their own personal name, whatever they called God, and that was unacceptable. And there's another opinion that it would be limiting, and God is not limiting, that to write his name in there would be a limitation of the revelation that really came to save the Jewish nation. The Jews had committed many sins, and that was problematic, and that really brought down this decree from the higher heavens. And that's why we say on Purim, in fact, I heard a class today from Chaya Bracha Leiter, who I teach with in the summers in Ascent, and I want everybody to give me a bracha that I get there this summer. But she said, which I had never really heard before, that at midnight they convene a court, like a Beis Din, and people pray for whatever they request, whatever they want, whatever they're requesting. It's a time to pray and have your requests answered. Okay, so let's go on. So we begin the story with the drama of the killing of Vashti on the 7th day of Ahasuerus' feast. So he didn't make the feast until the 3rd year of his reign, because he thought that by the 3rd year, he thought that God had abandoned Israel since 70 years had passed since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, but he calculated wrong, as we said before. And then Haman told him to make this big feast and to use the temple's vessels and to invite all the Jews to eat and drink. And one of my favorite parts of the Megillah is when Ahasuerus is showing off his wealth. So he makes a party for 180 days. Now, that's a party. Have you ever been to a party I think the longest party I ever went to was when my friend Patrice got married, and it was in Murrieta Hot Springs, and we were only supposed to go one night, and when we got there, and I said, oh no, we can't stay longer, because some people came a few days before, some people were staying after, and I said, I had a lot of kids at home, and we had a baby with us, I don't remember who, and we got there, and it was the most gorgeous place with mineral baths and massages and a chassan and kala and a wedding. And actually, I think we stayed like 4 days. We stayed till all the food ran out that was brought for the wedding. I mean, I think that's the longest long-running party I've ever been to. But Ahasuerus beats me. He made a party for 180 days. And he wore all the vestments of the high priest, and it says that he showed them the glorious wealth of his kingdom and the majesty, and that refers to the garments of the high priest. And he showed off his personal fortune. He did not show off the fortune of the kingdom. He showed off the personal fortune, and there are many details that every day was different. And he had different groups of people coming from every nation. I think they each came for something like 10 days. And his treasures were displayed every single day. And he changed them. Nothing was shown more than once. And the menu for each day was different. That's for 180 days. And the same dish was never served twice. And then he made, at the end of this 180-day feast, he made a special feast for the city of Shushan, the capital, a 7-day feast after the 180 days were over. And he made this feast for the Jews mainly, although the whole city was invited, but he made it for the Jews. And it says he spent as much money on this 7-day feast as he did for the whole 180 days of the banquet. This is really, we're going to go on just so you get an understanding of the power and the wealth that he controlled. So the banquet was held outside, and there were hangings to protect the guests from the elements, and the hangings were of fine white, green, and blue cloth, like tents, and marble, and oh, this is another one of my favorite parts of the Megillah. It says that he pleasured 4 of the 5 senses. So the sense of taste was stimulated by the food and drink. The sense of sight was the beautiful hangings and materials and decorations. The sense of smell were the perfumed air and the gardens, the blossoms in the gardens. The sense of touch was the fine couches that every guest could relax on. And the only sense that he did not provide for was the sense of hearing. Well, even though he had the finest musicians in his kingdom, but we all know that when you hear music that you do not like, that it actually becomes quite unpleasant. It's not something that you can ignore. I actually went to a Burning Man a few years ago with my kids, and there was a lot of electronic music being played all night long, and I have to say that, maybe if it was, some nice 60s music that I love and I love to listen to when I drive, I might have been happy to hear it all night long. But hearing music that you do not like all night long is very, very difficult. So he wanted it to be pleasurable. And there's another reason for not having music. It says that music has a spiritual quality, and it can elevate a person to a certain spiritual place. And he didn't want the Jews to be stimulated to do tshuva, or to really feel a connection to holiness, and therefore he didn't have music. It says drinking was from golden cups, and each cup was different, and each person was allowed to keep the cup they drank for and eat from, and each drink was from a different cup, and there was much royal wine. And there had been a custom at that time in royalty that you had to drink a certain amount, and that was disbanded. Sometimes that amount was so much that it would kill people, so that was disbanded. And Haman tried to bring up very negative things. So he said to the king, if a fly falls into a cup of wine, a Jew will remove the fly and drink it. But if the king touches the wine, they will refuse to drink it. They will spill out the wine and wash the cup. And one of the leaders said, this is not disrespect for the king. This is, we're following our customs. And then he took the finger bowl of which the king had rinsed his fingers after eating, and he drank the water from the finger bowl to show that we do not refuse to drink the wine from a cup that the king touched out of disrespect. We are only following our own personal customs. Also, it used to be people were forced to drink at these parties. There was no one that was forced. And if anybody had a desire for something, immediately it would be fulfilled. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women and for the wives of all the people that were coming, separate but equal. And her feast was equal to that of Ahasuerus, and she showed off the wealth, and she also wore the vestments of the high priest, and everything was prideful. She felt that she was the daughter of the great King Belshazzar, and she was very proud, and she was very haughty. And it says, also Vashti the queen made. At first it talks her about as Vashti, and later it talks her about as the queen. So on the 7th day, when the king was very happy, meaning he was drunk, he gave orders to all his ministers, and one of the things that during this time Mordechai and the Sanhedrin did was they fasted this whole entire time. They fasted from the week the feast was in Shushan, from Sunday to Friday till before Shabbos. And they prayed to God because they knew this might not go well for the Jews, that this was in order to entrap them. And And he had 7 ministers for each of the days of the week, and also Queen Vashti. And while he was drunk, while he was drunk, he was bragging about his wife. Now, the Jews were not there on Shabbos. That was the only day that they were not there. And even though they partook of the feast all week, and because they observed Shabbos and they didn't also desecrate Shabbos like they did with the food and drink, that they were saved in the end. In Persia, it was a custom for the wives to dance nude before the company, and Ahasuerus was drunk enough that he wanted the queen to do the same thing. And he boasted, everybody was boasting, they were drunk, they were boasting about their women. And ultimately, what happens is that the king calls for Queen Vashti wearing nothing but her royal crown. And one of the things is that this was to punish her for demanding that the Jewish girls serve her on Purim, serve her on the Shabbos and also serve her nude. So Vashti wanted the Jews to violate the Shabbos, just like King Ahasuerus wanted the Jews to violate their religion by the food and the drink that they were served. And also Vashti was trying to entice the Jewish women to not observe things, to turn away from God, because she knew that women have a very strong influence over men, and if the women became immoral, the men would follow behind them. It actually says in a Gemara or in the Talmud, I'm not sure exactly where, that there a story about two good people, a husband and wife. And for some reason, after 10 years, they didn't have children and they decided to divorce. And the good woman married a not good man, and the good man married a not good woman. And the woman was able to influence her husband to become good, and the not good woman was able to influence her good husband to deviate from that. So women have a very powerful influence if they're smart enough to know how to use it. And if you want a class, see me. So, and no, I'm only kidding. I do not have all the answers, but I have some advice in that area. So, okay, let's continue. So the king, he didn't send his most important ministers when he wanted to call Vashti to appear nude so he could show off her beauty to all his drunken friends. He sent commoners. He can't send common servants. So each step of the way was another level of refusal from Vashti. In the end, she said, if the king came himself or if he sent the highest ministers, that she would come. Then if she was allowed to wear a veil that she, over her body, she would come. She considered herself superior, and she dismissed in a condescending way each person that came to summon her. And she talked about being the granddaughter of a great king, and on and on and on. And then when she was almost going to give in, this terrible rash appeared all over her body, and she grew what looked like a tail. A big polyp appeared, and she grew a tail, and she said, I can't come. I'll come another day. But I cannot come today. And the king was losing his patience, and he replied she should come immediately naked, and she refused to come. And now the plot thickens. So it says that she was humiliating him, and if his own wife refused to come and obey him, how could he hope to run a kingdom? But he tried to suppress his anger because he loved Vashti, so he came to his ministers to discuss it. So it's interesting because he first came to the Jewish ministers, the Jewish sages, and he asked them what to do. Now they understood that no matter what they answered, it was not going to be good for the Jews. And so they told him, as long as they lived in peace in their own country, their minds were clear and calm, and they had the breastplate to provide a divine answer. But now that the temple was destroyed and they suffered, their minds are no longer clear, and they cannot judge this case. Because they knew if they said, punish her, and he would take it against them when he stopped being drunk. And if they said, don't punish her, he'll also take that against them. So they said, we don't have clarity of mind since we're not in our rightful homeland, and we're sorry, but we can't answer this question. So basically what happened is that he went to many different of the ministers. It goes into detail in the commentary. But Haman is the one who brought up having her killed. And he bore a grudge against her because she snubbed him. And he also had a daughter that he wanted, if Vashti was out of the way, then his daughter could marry the king. So according to the law, the text says what must be done with King Vashti. He did not want them to hand down a sentence. Ahasuerus loved his wife. He loved Vashti. And even though there was great disrespect, he did not want it to have a bad ending. And he gave these hints, and he asked not to judge the wife. But what happened was that Haman jumped on the bandwagon, and he turned the king. He said to the king, basically, this is one of my favorite parts also. I have a lot of favorite parts. He said to the king that what the queen did will be known to all the women in the land. And you'll have a big women's lib movement, and none of them will obey their husband. This is a terrible precedent. You cannot let this happen, that there will be disrespect and to the husbands. And this is exactly how he was able to do away with Vashti. And he finally, or the king finally agreed, and he had her killed. And and he also used the persuasion of then men will never be able to control their wives, and the wives will just run rampant and do what they want. And so Haman got the king to make a law that no one can come into his presence without being asked, and that Vashti will never be allowed to come into the king's presence. And he said that you have to declare a law to this effect. And he said you have to immediately send a letter to, and this is a very crucial point in the story, you have to send a letter to all 127 countries, written in the language of each country, that the husband is the ruler in the home, that each wife must obey the husband, and if not, he can have her killed, and that each woman must only speak the language of her husband. So when this letter arrived at all the people's houses and they read it, this was really an indication that the king was an idiot of some sort. Men loved their wives. They weren't going to have them killed. They weren't going to insist that they're the rulers in their home. And so this lessened the force, because later on in the story, in the Megillah, when when Haman convinces King Ahasuerus to make a decree against the Jews that in a year's time that every Jew, man, woman, and child will be killed, and that each of the people in each of the countries and each of the provinces and each of the towns will be able to not only kill the Jews, but collect all their property. But they all have to do it on one day. They wanted to do it like a surprise attack on one day. And no one did it earlier. You would think they got carte blanche to kill the Jews, that they would start right away, because many of them were terrible anti-Semites. But because of this first letter that was sent out, they all held back and waited for that day in a year's time, because everyone knew that the king tremendously regretted having killed Vashti. And they didn't want to jump the gun and kill all the Jews of the nation and then have the king turn on them for doing it. And because of this foolish decree that was sent out in the beginning, this is one of the things that helped to prevent the slaughter of the Jews before the year would pass for the day that he decreed that they should be killed. So also, Vashti was burned alive. And the letters were sent to all the different countries, and when the king found out not only that Vashti had been killed, but she was burnt alive, he said he couldn't wrap his mind around it. He gazed at her portrait. He kept wondering what happened to her. He did not remember having killed her. He said, "Bring Vashti to me," and he was told she was executed, and he couldn't believe it, and nothing was left. And he said, why did he order her burned like a common criminal? That the punishment for a member of royalty is decapitation, not burning alive. And he just couldn't be comforted, and he became very depressed. So his serving boys, the people around him, suggested to him that he remarry, and that he only remarry a commoner, so she wouldn't lord it over him. And he had a beauty contest. So I want to just tell you about a beauty contest. That there is a woman, if you're American and you're over 50, you might know about it. If you're not, if you're young, you might not have heard of her. But there was a woman, and her name was Bess Meyerson. And in 1945, she was Miss America, and she was the only Jewish Miss America ever. And her story is absolutely fascinating. It's not for now, but her story is fascinating. And she had some problems, and we took her to the Lubavitcher Rebbe for a blessing. We were friends with her. And we took her to the Lubavitcher Rebbe for a blessing. She was very famous. She had been on TV. She was very big in the political world. And she was an ally of Mayor Ed Koch. At one point, there were 33 prosecuting attorneys working on a case against her in the state of New York. And that is why we brought her to the Rebbe for a bracha. And she was acquitted of many, many, many counts, and she came back to thank the Rebbe. We brought her back to thank the Rebbe, and she brought with her a very good friend, because everybody had turned on her. Like, it was very interesting. She never looked at the newspapers. It was front page newspaper every day because she was famous. And she said she never looked at the newspapers. And when she was in the trial that lasted many, many days, she turned her hearing aids off. And she read a book of Tehillim. She had a book, we gave her a book of Psalms. It was in English. She read the Psalms. She turned her so she would not hear any negativity. And she won, and she wanted to come back to thank the Rebbe. And she brought a friend with her, and she said, this is the only person that's remained my friend. Like, everybody turned against her. And the Rebbe said to her, thank you for being such a good friend to Mrs. Meyerson. And then he said to her, you are a champion. Because he knew, because we had let one of the Rebbe's secretaries know all the details before she went in, that she had been a beauty queen. She was a famous beauty queen in America. And he said, you are a champion. And as a champion, you need to speak publicly for Judaism. And that is really what a queen does, is represents the highest level of a nation, the beauty of a nation. And so now they're calling for a beauty contest, and to pick a woman to replace Vashti for the king. And this is how Esther comes into the picture. So, how do you pick a queen? How do you find who's beautiful? So instead of sending an emissary to look through all the countries, they appointed somebody in each country, because every country has a different standard for what they feel is beautiful. And so one of the officials of each country would go in the country and look for the one he thought was the most beautiful. And so 127 girls were brought. There's many stipulations about the girls. We won't go into it. But now we're coming to the part in the Megillah where it says there was a Jewish man in Shushan, the capital. His name was Mordecai, son of Yair, son of Shimi, son of Kish, of the tribe of Benjamin. And Esther grew up in his house. There are many different opinions, if she was his niece, if she was adopted, if she was a spouse, a wife. But she was captured. She was taken to the palace. It was told that any girl that would hide, they would kill if they found her hiding, because no one really wanted to go. It wasn't like, oh, great, we have an opportunity to marry the king. The king killed the queen. Also, once a woman was with the king, she couldn't be with another man. So nobody was really, if she wasn't picked queen, so nobody was really eager, but there was a threat against their life if they were found hiding. So at Mordecai, it says, we're going back to the text of the Megillah, that he raised his cousin Hadassah, was her Hebrew name, which represents the myrtle. The myrtle is one of the species that we use when we shake lulav and esrog on Sukkot, and she was also known as Esther. And she was beautiful. She was pleasing. It says that the myrtle is evergreen. It retains its foliage all year round. She was always virtuous, religious, no matter where she was. She was pleasant to everyone, and now she was in the king's clutches, so to speak. She was taken to the palace, and Haggai was the keeper of the women, and many, many things happened during the time that she was there. Whoever saw her, one of the things Mordecai told her was not to say who her people were who she was, or where she was from. And so she was brought to the palace. And it says that the girls were watched because the king wanted to make sure that there was no flaws in their body, no flaws in their system, and that they would be treated in kind of beauty treatments for a year period, because personality and looks don't always match what's going on. But Haggai saw the royalty in Esther, and he treated her favorably. And she maintained being a vegetarian during that time. She didn't eat anything except uncooked natural foods. And also, very interesting, she had 7 different serving girls to serve her during the week, so that on Shabbos, she would always have the same serving girl, that her maids would not know that she did anything different on Shabbos. So the one who came Monday saw what she did Monday, but the one who came on Shabbos always saw her refraining from work on Shabbos, whatever she was doing or not doing, so it didn't stand out, that there would be no indication that she was Jewish, because Mordecai instructed her, don't tell about her people or her birthplace. She kept the secret for 9 years, from the 3rd year of Ahasuerus' reign until the 12th year, when she had to defend her people. And Mordecai realized that this was the hand of God, and this was going to be crucial in some way for the Jewish people. Mordecai walked near the courtyard every day to find out how she was. They couldn't openly speak to each other, so it wouldn't be an indication that she was a Jew in any way. And every girl had a turn to come to the king, and they were allowed to take, like whatever they needed to make that night special. They could take an orchestra, they could take all kinds of perfume, whatever they needed, all kinds of foods, dinners, symphonies, whatever. And Esther wanted nothing when it became her turn, that she wanted nothing. And when the king would take one woman for the night, she would be as if she would be queen, servants, whatever. I mean, everybody except Esther wanted that position. Since they were there already, they wanted that position except Esther. She did not ask for anything. She didn't want to, she said she wasn't going to wear any of the beautiful gowns. She wasn't going to put on the makeup, but Haggai told her she had to. Otherwise, it would be disrespectful to the king, and she might even be killed. And she was attractive, it says, to everyone who saw her. I read something where it says, there are 70 nations, and there are different characteristics of goodness in each nation. And Esther had all of that within her. So when all the different people saw her, each nation felt that they could claim her as their own because she had some sterling quality of all these different nations. She had a very deep love of humanity inside her, and her appeal was universal. And she was taken to the king Ahasuerus in the 10th month, the month of Teves, in the 7th year of his reign. So that the winter is the coldest. Teves is January, and it's one of the coldest months of the year. And it says that it was a kindness, a divine providence, that her turn came out during the coldest month of the year, because it's the time when a body feels the need for another body for warmth. So it is, and she was not eager, but that's when she went. And it says for a Jew, there is nothing worse than intermarriage. And so here and now, she immediately, once the king was with her, he chose no one else. No one else went on trial after her. He immediately fell in love with her, and he immediately chose her, and he loved her more than any other woman. And he was happy that Vashti no longer was there. He made her queen, and she asked for nothing. And she had this external beauty and this internal beauty. It's so interesting because all our matriarchs, our prophetesses, all the women that were such giants in that we can emulate and we can look up to, were beautiful women. They had this inner beauty and they had an outer beauty. And she was given all the honors, and her picture was, Vashti's picture was taken down, her picture went up, and he didn't even consult with anyone. He just immediately chose her as his queen, and he made a great feast, and he made a tax holiday for all the lands, because he was hoping that her people would reveal themselves and want some extra favor, And another feast was a little nerve-wracking because of the memories of what happened at the last feast. There are many poor people and Esther dissuaded him from continuing this feast because she number one, she knew what would happen if he got drunk. She could be killed. Number two, she said there are so many poor people, and if poor people would have to come to your feast, they'd have to spend money and they'd have to buy clothing, and it would be a hardship for them. And so they relaxed this atmosphere of everybody having to come. And he hoped her relatives would offer clues, but that did not happen. She said she was an orphan, and her father died before she was born, and her mother died in childbirth. So he exempted all his subjects from their annual tax in the merit of Esther, and he kept being sure that her relatives would come forward, but they didn't. So Mordecai encouraged him to have another beauty contest, hoping that he would choose a different girl, but he didn't. And then Mordecai was able to see that this was absolutely divine providence, and that God has something in mind with all of this. And girls were brought a second time, and Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate as a royal advisor and judge. And so any suspicion that he and Esther had some connection was alleviated, because why would he want another girl in this position of power besides Esther? So they thought, no, there is no connection, because there was some seeing of him moving around the king's gate. And there were clues that she was Jewish, but no one was really able to follow up on it. Now, here comes a twist in the story. So there were two of the king's servants, Bigthan and Teresh, were hostile and planned to assassinate King Ahasuerus. And they spoke a language, I think it was called, it starts with a T. I don't remember what the name of the language is. And they were not careful when they were speaking in front of Mordecai, because they didn't know really. They knew he had a high position, but they didn't know how high. They didn't know he had the ear of Esther, who had the ear of potentially, if she wanted, maybe by chance or maybe not, of the king. And there was a general revolt that was brewing, and Bigthan and Teresh tried to draw Mordecai into it. He wasn't interested. And they wanted to assassinate Ahasuerus for many reasons. One, they demoted him. It sounds like, God forbid, the people that are fired from a job and then go back and kill people. I mean, it seemed nothing new under the sun. And it says also that, we have a crying child in the background. Let's see if a parent hears them. And that they felt they wanted to stop the king. And also they wanted Esther out of the way. They were relatives of Vashti, and they wanted to avenge Vashti. Now, Mordecai had been a member of the Sanhedrin, and the members of the Sanhedrin spoke 70 languages. He spoke all 70 languages, and he overheard their plot to kill them, and he went to Queen Esther, and he told Esther that in her name he should inform the king of this plot to kill him, and Esther only informed in the name of Mordecai. She went against what Mordecai said, and she informed in the name of Mordecai. Their native language was Tarshian. So it says, as a member of the Sanhedrin, he understood all of these things very deeply, and he really never knew that Esther said it was in his name when she reported to the king. That he thought she said it in her own name. And he wanted Esther to get the credit for saving the king's life, but Esther wanted him to have the credit. And this is also a very big turning point in the story. And he had it written in the book of records that they were going to poison the king, and of course he had them hung. And they were good friends of Haman. And guess what? Haman came to appeal, tried to get the king not to kill them. And that there was a note one day that the king should reward Mordecai, that he saved his life. But you know what happened? He totally forgot about it. The king would not reward Mordecai now. And when the time came and he remembered to reward Mordecai, that it was Haman's downfall that happened because of it. So now we come to the fact that King Ahasuerus promotes Haman, which is what he wanted. He wanted really to be king, and he had a plot even to kill the king eventually, once he got Esther out of the way. So he wanted to be promoted in order to be able to get the Jews to sin. This was his passion. He was at the height of his power for only 70 days. And he sent out letters to exterminate the Jews. And these letters were sent out on the 13th of Nisan for the following year, that in the month of Adar, that the Jews should be murdered. And so Haman was responsible ultimately for finding Esther because he killed Vashti. And the king rewarded him for it because it was his idea to have a beauty contest. And he was given the highest position in the land next to the king. So now we have Haman, who has great wealth and he has great power. And it says that Mordecai had saved the king's life and he was not rewarded during this time. So Haman kept adding to his wealth and he kept adding to his power. And in the end, guess what? It all was going to go to Mordecai and Esther. So the story goes on, and there are many, many details of the story. Now, Haman had the king decree that everybody should bow down to him and show him respect, because this was not unusual in the Orient, in the East, that people would bow down to those in charge. And people knew his origins. Haman's origins was he had been a bath attendant and a barber. I really want to encourage everybody to read the commentaries. They're so enlightening to understand the deep dynamics in this story and really the miracle that happened for the Jews and will happen again. And the king ordered Haman to flatter the populace and to become very in with them, and that they should show proper respect to him as a prime minister. And he said that even the people that sat at the king's gate should bow to Haman. And the king's gate was where the highest ranking officers of the kingdom were hung out. They heard cases, they judged cases from there. And it says that the higher ranking people would have to kneel to Haman, but the commoners would have to prostrate themselves on the ground. And what did he do? He kept an idol under his clothing, so that he wanted the Jews to be convicted by God of sinning. And we know that we're not allowed to worship idols, and that they wouldn't even know that they were bowing to an idol. And that because the king would have never compelled a person in his kingdom to bow to a god that was not his. So Haman, through trickery, put this idol inside. And Mordecai was not going to bow with the idol or without the idol to Haman, and it aided him. And this was the reason, because of this one person, Mordecai, and his intense hatred towards him, that he offered the king all his fortune to kill the Jews. So, and it just bothered him. It bothered him. And there were, in the past, before this whole story starts, Mordecai and Haman were in a battle together. They were battling a country that had rebelled against King Ahasuerus in the Persian Empire. And Haman squandered all his provisions and his men, and Mordecai lauded it over him in a certain way. He helped him. He kept him alive, really, by food and provisions. But there was a price. And Mordecai said Haman would have to serve him as a slave 1 day a week. And Haman had to agree. And also Haman was a barber. Many of these details you can learn in the commentary, and you can see where this hatred stemmed from. It didn't just come out of nowhere, but his hatred toward Mordecai was really what propelled him to turn on the whole Jewish nation. Even though we know he was a descendant of Amalek, so that hatred towards Jews was deep inside him. And Mordecai replied, "I only bow down to God." You know, there was one year that Shlomo and I were in the Marat Machpelah in Hebron, and I was inside, and Shlomo was standing outside on the stairs looking down at the courtyard, and Arabs opened fire. And there were 200 young people, let's say in their 20s, davening, praying outside in the courtyard, not inside the building. And during that attack, also Shlomo was very near the shooters, and he could actually see their eyeballs as they were shooting at him. But Baruch Hashem, no one was hurt in that. And everybody went flat down on the ground. Everybody was told to go flat down on the ground, except for a man whose name is Baruch Marcel, who's a friend of ours who lives in Hebron. And he quoted this. He quoted from the Megillah, "I will not bow to anyone but God." And he never went down. He stood there, tall and straight, not bowing. And he quoted this quote from Mordecai. And Haman saw Mordecai was not kneeling or prostrating, and he kept getting angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier. And then he wanted to exterminate all the Jews, and he went to the king, and he offered the king money. Now it says that, which is very important because this is where we get the name of the story, Purim, from. It says, in the first month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, the P-U-R, lottery was cast before Haman. Now, we name the holiday after a Persian word. And what is the lottery? The lottery was, in Hebrew, the word is gorel. It means lottery when you cast slots to make a decision. But the name Purim was kept as the holiday. And what Haman didn't know, it fell on the month of Adar. And he was very excited because in the month of Adar, we know that, I think we talked about it last week. In the month of Adar, on the 7th of Adar is the yahrzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, our holy teacher. But what Haman didn't know was the 7th of Adar was also the birthday of Moshe. So Haman took it as, oh, it's a terrible day for the Jews. Therefore, let's pick the month of Adar. So also Adar was, the 13th of Adar was the day God had brought the plague of darkness upon the Egyptians. So it was a day that was not in disfavor for the Jews. So Haman goes to the king Ahasuerus and he tells him, and this is also another pivotal point in the story, that there is a certain group scattered and spread among all the nationalities in all the lands of your empire. They're different from other nations. So this whole thing of being scattered and is a very important point in this story. And we're going to go back to, let me just see, one of these teachings from the Rebbe addresses it. Yes, here it is. Okay. So let's go through this teaching. So it's talking about Jewish unity, how it's relevant to Purim. Because Haman sought to kill and annihilate all Jews, young and old, children, men, women, in one day. He did not relate to Jews as individuals. He viewed the entire nation as a collective. And all of these events led up and revolved around this issue of Jewish unity. So in the Megillah, when we talk about Ahasuerus, the king of Persia, remember we talked in the beginning of this class that we're also referring to God when it only says the king, when it doesn't say Ahasuerus. Because there was this indictment in the heavenly court against the Jews. A decree couldn't have been issued without there being an indictment in the heavenly courts against them. And what was the indictment based on? It was based on eating of this feast of that Ahasuerus made in the city of Shushan. And it says that in the beginning, it started off with kosher food and with kosher wine. And then it ended up with non-kosher food and non-kosher wine. And it says that they were told by Mordechai not to go in the first place, that it would be assimilation would take place and it would be their downfall. And it was. So it goes on to say that Haman says to Ahasuerus, to help his case in destroying the Jews, there is one nation, they are scattered, and they're dispersed among the people. And it is not to the benefit of the king to tolerate them. And he talked about their spiritual and physical description of the state of the Jewish people at that time. Not only were they scattered geographically, they weren't in only Shushan. They were all over different countries, but they became divided in terms of themselves. And it was this division and this dissension that made it possible for Haman's request to be accepted by the king, but meaning God, when we say the king. As long as Jews are united, they cannot be destroyed by their enemies. I will say that again, but I'm probably saying it to the wrong people because you are all people that want to be united. As long as Jews are united, they cannot be destroyed by enemies. So before Esther came to Ahasuerus, she requested that Mordechai, because what happens is that when this decree goes out from Haman, and it's sent to all these countries, that everybody has permission to murder the Jews in a year's time. And Mordechai understands that the only way that this is not going to happen is if the king rescinds the order. So he wants Esther to go in front of the king. And Esther says to him that she doesn't want to go. Because she hasn't been called to the king for 30 days. And if she goes without being called, the king will kill her. And he says to her, either you will go or somebody else will go. But surely God will save the Jewish people. And if it's not through you, your name and your father's household will be wiped out forever. And one of the hesitations in Esther going before King Ahasuerus was that up until this point, in all the years that she was his wife, married to him and having relations with him, she was considered as a captive woman and that she was forced. Once she would go willingly to him, then it would have been of her own free will. And in the theory that she might have been the wife of Mordecai, then she would be prohibited ever again, even if she was released from ever being with Mordecai again. So when it was unwilling, it was one level. But when she would go willingly, it would change her status. And she probably would be killed. And Mordecai said, it's either going to be you or someone else, but God will surely save the Jewish people. Where do we hear that before? We hear it when the Jews were crossing the sea and Nachshon ben Ammidav, when the sea was rising and there was no escape, and he knew that God said, you will serve me on the mountain, he just went forward. He went till the water came up to his nose, and then the water split. There was a certainty that he would be saved. And we also have to have that same certainty. I mean, I personally heard from the lips of the Lubavitcher Rebbe that Mashiach will be coming and there will be the redemption of the Jewish people. And I believe it. And that we will go forward and that we will go with a lot of strength. But what do we need to do first? We need to have unity. And so Esther requested that Mordecai go gather all the Jews together. And she knew that she could not succeed unless all of them joined together and corrected the spiritual flaw that had brought about this decree. And so the Jews gathered together and they studied Torah, because we need Torah in order to go forward. And there is a connection between the giving of the Torah and Purim. So there is an interpretation of a verse that's in the Megillah. And the verse is, the Jews fulfilled and accepted upon themselves what they had agreed and accepted before at the giving of the Torah. They fulfilled what they had already accepted upon themselves at the time of the giving of the Torah. And it says, at Mount Sinai, the Jews achieved complete unity. There's a verse. And Israel camped there before the mountain. And it says that the camped is in the singular. And it says that they received the Torah like one person with one heart. That's how they received the Torah. And in our world, unity comes only through a connection to God, because everyone is unique, and only this revelation of God's unity can bring together all the elements that are separate, because Torah and God are one. So Torah is the medium to reveal this unity. And even though Torah study is an intellectual discipline, everybody has a different intellectual capacity, and everybody has differences. But it says the essence of Torah is rooted in a level of godliness that transcends all limitations and surpasses the confines of the intellect. And we understand there, when it says there was one nation scattered and dispersed among the people, that when we are cut off from each other and separated by the different cultures and the different practices of the adopted lands that Jews find themselves, then we still identify as one nation, despite the external differences that exist between one Jew and another. Through the influence of Torah, there is an inward unity. And we learn that we can appreciate the way that this unity was achieved on Purim, because it was even greater than the unity that prevailed at the giving of the Torah. Because when the Jews received the Torah, they were all collected in one place together. And they were living in the desert, and there was not really a lot of distractions on the day-to-day level, that there weren't so many things that could interfere and drive a wedge between the oneness among them. But at the time of the miracle of Purim, the Jews were scattered throughout the entire civilized world, and they had many difficulties of living in exile, and there was a threat of death that hung over them, and yet they were able to overcome their personal differences. They were able to gather together, they were able to fast, and they were able to join in unity. And two of the four essential mitzvahs of Purim, the gifts of food that are sent to friends and the charitable gifts to the poor, are expressions of friendliness and concern. So real unity implies a love for every Jew, which we are asked to have over and over again, even those Jews that we do not know personally. And we give these food gifts to our friends and close associates, but we give food and money to the poor person who we may never have met ever in our life. So we show that our relationships are not only bound by our personal feelings, and we can express this essential bond that unites our people. So we have to remember this aspect of unity. So we've only gotten to chapter 3 of 9 or 10. Is it 10 chapters? There are a lot of chapters. So I promised I would tell you a story. And then we're going to end the class because tomorrow is the fast of Esther. And it's really a day that we, even for if we are fasting, then we should use it as a day of tshuva, a day of returning to God, to godliness, to who our souls really are. If one can fast. If you can fast only an hour, fast an hour. If you can fast 3 hours, fast 3 hours. If you can only fast till lunchtime, fast till lunchtime. But whatever you can do, give extra charity. And at the end of the fast is the, I don't know where you are. I know where I am. And I think in Florida, the fast is over much later than it was in LA, than the time in LA. But the weather is warmer, and I'm happy about that. And for those of you who are not going anywhere tomorrow night, the Chai Center is at 8 o'clock California time. We're having a Zoom Purim party and Megillah reading. And so I just want to end with my only really true-to-life Purim story. So I lived in Jerusalem in the 1970s, and if anybody looked at the news, it just snowed in all of Israel and in Jerusalem. My grandchildren that live there actually built a snowman. And everybody was very excited about the snow because it doesn't really snow there. It snows maybe once every few years. So I was living in an area called, I can't even remember, Zikron something, which is next to Meir Sharim. And in those years in Israel, in the 70s, people used money changers. So the bank was very difficult to change money in. It took a long time. You had to bring all your passport and your information. But a money changer was actually the black market, and they would give you more money than the bank. So I had a money changer, and my money changer, I know he's no longer alive, but in case there's any spies on this Facebook page, I'm not going to say his last name. His name was Abraham, and his wife's name was Leah, and they lived in Meir Sharim. And for anybody who has not been in Meir Sharim is one of the oldest areas in Jerusalem. There are many houses crowded together. It's very, very religious people live there. Many people live in poverty. I know that there are probably many beautiful places that have been redone there also, but many people live in very cramped circumstances. And Alfred and Leah had raised 7 children in one room that I was going to say is half the size of this room, but you don't know what size room I'm in, but it was not big. And the kitchen and the bathroom were shared, and it was outside their small apartment. Their children they were all grown, they did not live in Jerusalem. And it was snowing, and it was cold, and it was snowing and cold. And I was in my apartment about a 25-minute walk away, and I was worried about them. They were elderly, and I didn't know if they had food, if they needed anything. I didn't even know if they had warmth, and I decided to walk over there. So I walked over there, and Avram wasn't there, but Leah was. She was, I don't want to say elderly, because I'm not really sure how old she was, but she looked old, and she moved in an old way, and she was an old woman. I mean, she had grandchildren and maybe even some great-grandchildren. And she was lying it was freezing in the apartment, and she was lying in bed under the covers. Excuse me. So she lifted the covers, and she told me to get inside and lie down next to her. for warmth. And she spent many, many hours telling me story after story of growing up in Jerusalem and her childhood growing up. And this one story she told me was a Purim story that I'm going to share with you. So she said she was a young girl. She was 12 years old. And we talked earlier in the class that one of the commandments, one of the mitzvahs of Purim is to have the Feast of Esther. Tomorrow's the fast, but we like the feast one better. So it was the Feast of Esther. And we have somebody from Yerushalayim right here and now, Mimi, who's going to have that Fast of Esther, if Mashiach doesn't come, and the Feast of Esther right in the holy city of Jerusalem. And so her family was very poor. They also lived in Meir Sharim. And her mother had some beautiful linen tablecloths. So her mother gave her these linen tablecloths, and she told her to try to sell them. Go out through the city and try to sell them and see if anybody would buy them, and then they would have money for the Feast of Esther. Otherwise, they would have no money. So she took these linen tablecloths, and she went throughout the city, and she tried to sell them, and nobody wanted to buy them. So she found herself standing in a very large courtyard near the Meir Sharim area. And all of a sudden, she sees a British soldier that was on a horse ride in and stop. And she goes up to because the British were ruling Israel at the time. And she goes up to the British soldier and she shows him the linen tablecloths. And she says to him, "Would you like to purchase these tablecloths?" And he says no, and he rides away. And when the dust settles, she sees right in the dust where he had been with his horse was a large gold coin. And she's staring at this coin, and all of a sudden she hears a voice next to her that says, "Pick it up, it's yours." And she looks over to her side, and she sees an old woman standing next to her. And again, this woman says to her, "Pick it up, it's yours." And she walks over and she bends down and she picks up this coin and she stands up and she looks back to look at the woman, and the woman is gone. She disappeared. And she said that she was in the middle of a huge courtyard. She said there was nowhere that woman could have come from, and there's nowhere that woman could have gone to. But she was always convinced that it was Queen Esther who had come to her to make sure that they would have money for the Feast of Esther, for the Purim Suda. So I want to wish everybody a happy Purim, and I will be having a happy Purim with my grandchildren. And bonus, I have 3 great-grandchildren that also live in Florida. And yesterday, I had a great-grandson visiting from New York that I had never met. He was born during Corona, and I never got to see him. And I think he's like 5.5 or 6 months old, and I got to see him last night for the first time. So, yes, I will be coming back from Florida. Nobody worry. So anyway, everybody should have a beautiful... Oh, come here. You want to say hi to my friends?
Yeah.
This is my grandson, Isaac, who really should be sleeping, but he's going to say happy Purim to everybody. You want to say happy Purim?
Yeah, happy Purim.
Do you want to tell everybody what you're going to dress as?
A transformer.
Okay, he's going to be a transformer. And Rivka Roth is going to join me. So I want to remind everybody who's not going to a Megillah reading tomorrow night or anywhere to tune in to the Chai Center. We're having a Zoom event, and you will see me as Queen. You won't recognize me because I'm going to be Queen Esther. So anyway, l'chaim, everybody, and Thank you, everybody, so much again for coming to the class. And next Wednesday, I will be teaching same time from Miami with more to report. So everybody really should have a blessed Purim. And Meretz Hashem, with God's help, we should be celebrating it together in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem. Okay. Bye, everybody.